Everyone, thank you so much for coming. Today is a treat because when I look at the challenges in 2022, I really think there are two clear challenges that businesses have. One is leadership agility as we continue to adjust to remote work and figure out the tools that we have to help people succeed. And then the second piece of it is there is such noise in the marketplace that marketing is the biggest challenge that you have in business today. And so in my opinion, this is just my opinion, we have the fourth smartest marketer in the world behind, I'm going to name them off. Chris Walker, Dave Gerhardt, and Christopher Lochhead. And so when you look at the opportunities to speak with Pablo Gonzalez, it is super, super fun. So Pablo, thank you for joining us today. I can't wait to hear all the insights that you have for everyone.
Jerry, thank you for having me and for the insanely flattering fourth best marketer in the world moniker.
It's unofficial. It's unofficial, but in my heart and soul, that's where you're at.
Anybody not on the podium, I win. Just if you're not on the podium, I'm number one. That's all I'm saying.
That is true. That is true. Just a couple of housekeeping notes for everyone. We have now started our own private Facebook community. I would encourage you to go over to the best places to lead. If you are interested in helping your organization create a compelling company that outperforms, that's where you should be. And so I would tell you, come join our Facebook community. And the other thing that I'll share with you, because we just got out of it, every Thursday from 2 to 3 o'clock, Carol Ann was there, Pablo was there. We had really smart people solving hard problems. So this week we were talking about non-competes and how to handle non-competes. We had working with spouses and how to improve company cultures. And so it's just an opportunity for you to come get some different perspective, different insights that you are not tied to emotionally, so that you can help lead your company better. So I would tell you, those are fun places to be. So Pablo, when I look at businesses, I've spoken before about the business acceleration model, the 3 core functions of business: marketing, sales, and operation. You are a pure genius at the first step of building awareness, attention, desire, and then ultimately community. And I think, when I look at world-class brands, Nike, Pelotons, Disney, Harley Davidson, there is this incredible community surrounding their business. And I think that's where every business should be going. So talk to us just a little bit about your approach to marketing, what you're seeing out there, and really this shift that's happened over the last 10 years, but specifically over the last kind of 3 to 5 that we've been in this pandemic.
Yeah, man. Thanks for teeing me up. Kevin, Zach, AJ, Carol Ann, Caitlin, Alexandra, thanks for taking time out of your day to come listen to me, yap on over here with Jerry. I had this big realization moment about, I guess it was 8 years ago. My brother passed away, and I'm in the church at the funeral, and 1,200 people showed up. And at that time, I looked around at these 1,200 people and I thought, man, there's nothing that could be more valuable than this community of folks around me right now that have helped us through these 2 years and through this really, really terrible moment. And when I looked around and I saw that, and I thought about how in and out of the Catholic Church I had been since I was a teenager kind of thing. At that moment, it was clear that I was never leaving that, right? I was never leaving this community. And I had just been on this journey where I realized that I had to realize that the way that you build your reputation, the way that you build your business, the way that you kind of get ahead in life is through forging relationships. And the way that you do that is by adding value to people. And, if this community thing was so valuable to me that I could never leave it, there must be something there. And my reticular activator hit at that point. And the first thing that my brain went to once I started thinking, oh my God, this is a business model, right? Like this is solving for churn, was the idea that if you buy a Harley Davidson, you can't go out and get a Honda motorcycle 2 years later because you're going to lose all your friends. And that's why when you own a Harley, you're either owning a Harley forever or you're done riding motorcycles, right? Like you're having a lifestyle change. And I've just kind of chased those breadcrumbs ever since. And I didn't come at that point from a marketing background in any way, just from this innate need to make as many friends as possible. And at the time I was in business development in the construction world as a not even a salesperson, right? Like I was the director of sustainability for a hospital builder that knew that there was no career track as director of sustainability. And I knew that my skill set most closely mapped to business developer, more so than senior project manager or superintendent. So I set about trying to figure out how to put that all together. And I did it by leveraging this giant network that I had built in Miami by starting young profit groups for different nonprofits, young professional groups for different nonprofits, and then getting on the boards of nonprofits and then getting access to like some of the most influential people in town. And then eventually I had enough access to enough people and enough of an audience to like host events with a developer that I want to do business with, and put them on stage with a politician that is on the board of one of my nonprofits to talk about a subject that their development has something to do with, like transit-oriented development or things of that sort, sustainable housing, things like that. And that's when I realized that if I could lead with value and bring an audience to somebody and then put them on a stage and make them guilty by association with somebody that they want to know anyways, it was just this really, really powerful technique of adding value to someone's life, getting me in the door for whatever I needed to do. And that's where, my beliefs around this idea of having a community and what you can do with a community and how you can use strategic relationships to add value to each other came to be. So long answer to your question, as I started looking at what's happening in business, it's pretty obvious to me that I see a world where digital giants are going to absolutely commoditize most things, and service providers, the folks that are out there value adding, not just selling a widget, but adding some kind of value add that has to do with the service, with the relationship that you have with the person, how you're going to get treated. The greatest moat that you can build is this community piece. And if you can do that effectively, then you have figured out a way to be seen as the guy that knows a guy all the time, right? Because you start becoming that person that's like, oh my God, I need something. Pablo's the person I call, right? Like I was that before I was a marketer. And if you can be that person and you can also engineer moments where two people that know, like, and trust you can be talking about how much they know, like, and trust you or your product in front of somebody else that is thinking about whether they want to know you or like you or trust you, there's nothing more powerful than that in order to get in the door and in order to, get a chance at doing business with them. And Jerry, as you know, I'm not a great closer by any means. I'm not Mr. Sales Guy. It's not, in my DNA. So I had to figure out ways to add value to people, right? Show up in people's lives in this value add way that makes them want to interact, and then reverse engineer the idea that they can show up to interact with me in a way where I'm not the one telling them that I'm good at something. It's kind of like what's happening right now. Right. And that is much more convincing than if I were to DM Zach and tell him that I'm the fourth best marketer in the world. Right. So, just kind of it. There's just no more powerful tool than social validation at scale.
You don't have to. Jerry told me.
Exactly. Right. And I think that is the unique power of building communities. And so, when I think about this, I always go back to like trying to use the frameworks that I've built to create my life and build businesses. the foundational element when you look at the business acceleration model is vision and values. And you can't create a community when there isn't shared vision and values, right? And so I think when you start evangelizing the problem that you are trying to solve for, I'm on a mission to positively impact 5 million people over the next 5 years through better business, because I don't believe that anyone shows up to work to suck. And yet so many people show up to work and put in suboptimal performances. And so how do you help people do that? Well, isn't it the natural offshoot in today's digital world to create these communities that are around us because we have a shared view of the world and shared values? What is your experience in helping companies do this, to put their stake in the ground and say, here's who we are, here's what we believe, come along for the journey?
What's the answer? What's the question? What's my experience in doing this, or how is it done?
Yeah, I mean, what have you seen in, let's use JWB, right? So you're at their studio because you did their show. A great case study of the methodology that you use to build a community to drive $40 million worth of revenues. It just happened to not be your company.
Mm-hmm.
What was it that brought those people together at first and then tipped it over into a community?
What brought people together? I think what you're saying is 100% accurate, right? Like this idea that what unites people is the mission, right? Like this idea that if you are seeking to get people together and not make it transactional relationships, people want to see the world a certain way, agree upon that, and then agree by the rules of the games that we play, right? Like mission and core values, right? Mission as the destination, core values as the bumper lanes, right? So this stuff works really, really well under those conditions. For JWB, the problem that they were facing was that they are a unbelievably awesome company that has been on the front page of the Wall Street Journal twice. They have won Inc. 5000, like Inc. 500 awards, like 9 years in a row. They've won Inc. 500 best places to work, like multiple years in a row, stuff like that. And they were competing in this asset investing space that is heavily commoditized by, let me look at the term sheet. What does this thing do to me? And they had figured out an innovative business model that actually hedges for risk in a way that most others that are in this asset space don't, and still are able to, and are actually able to command higher returns that most places don't, because they're able to hedge for that risk and because they've completely vertically integrated this asset class, right? So how do you tell that story when people think that they're hopping on to be like, well, what does this house look like, right? Like does this thing sewer or septic? I've heard I can only invest in stuff that doesn't have a septic tank as a rental property investor, right? So if you have this like complex story to tell, you need time with people, right? Like you need time to indoctrinate them and time for them to understand that your view of the world and their view of the world and what you both want is aligned, right? So how do you get time with people? You figure out what the people that you want to spend time with, what they care about, and invite them to reach that objective, right? So like if you think about a rental property investor, what they care about is real estate. Do I know enough about real estate to know that this is for me? Do I know about other asset classes to understand whether or not this is the asset class I want to be in, right? Should I be putting this money in crypto or should I be putting it into Berkshire Hathaway stock, right? They care about if they're going to buy a house in Jacksonville. They care about whether or not Jacksonville is just basically hairy knuckle Florida and it's going to do whatever Florida do, or is it something special? Is there an actual advantage in it? They care about who's handling my money, and they care about who else is doing this. Is this, I'm a 65-year-old person about to retire, or any other 65-year-old white guy is about to retire doing this, right? Like people ask themselves those questions. So, what we designed is an opportunity for Greg, who's one of the co-founders of the company, to be able to serve people that thing that they're looking for, right? That information that allows them to contextualize what, is this for them or not, right? And we did that by basically taking inventory of these things that matter to them, taking inventory of who within their ecosystem right? Whether it's their clients, whether it's their network or their partners or people within the company or people in the industry that they have access to. Designing a schedule by which people are going to come and talk about one of those things. Like, right, we had the president of the Chamber of Commerce of Jacksonville talking about, the economic climate here in Jacksonville. We've had multiple other investors that they've done business with that are also experts in other real estate classes talking about why they're doing business in this real estate class with these folks, even though they're real estate investors, right? So like, if we can organize that conversation and the invitation of what we're about to talk about and who you're about to meet is compelling enough, then you're going to make time out of your day to show up, right? And if you make time out of your day to show up enough times while Greg is being able to be providing that value to you and able to then say, hey, so yeah, so that's how this thing relates to that. And, this is how it would do for you. The more time that people spend with him, the better. But Greg at first was thinking that I can do this by going around the office and, recording some videos, right? Because he's an expert in the subject, right? Like he's an expert in the subject. He has tons of value to give, but that mental burden was such that he was spending like 20, 25 hours a week just thinking about what am I going to teach online. He was walking around office when something cool would happen. He'd be like, oh, do it again. Let me film you. And people hated him for it, right? So the idea of compressing all that time into like a 1 hour interaction where you can invite everybody that you want to do business with and you're doing business to spend time together on a Zoom call like this and find out what they want to find out about, get the question in that they want to get, and get educated on everything they know and spend all the time that they need with Greg, while Greg only has to spend 1 hour a week, was kind of the foundation of this. I mean, it's, if it sounds familiar, it's exactly what Jerry is doing, right? So, this vehicle of being able to show up once a week online and solve problems for people and introduce you to folks in a specific way, and then take that recording and distribute it all around the internet, what it does is create, to something that Fonzie and his brother taught me to say, it creates a frictionless nurture system, right? Like it creates this ability to get familiarized with somebody and get closer and closer to the ecosystem. And if you spend enough time in this chat, you're going to start making friends with each other, right? Like people that show up here every single week, at some point, just because I'm here and you're here and everybody's here, the faces become familiar enough where the relationships don't just start happening with Jerry and with the and with the speaker. They start kind of like happening in the chat, and people start knowing about each other's lives because you're seeing the questions that you're asking and you're seeing the growth. And then guess what happens? The same thing that Jerry's doing right now. Then at a certain point, you're like, why don't we all just take this to a Facebook group? And now you have this other platform where people are interacting all the time, and you're the person that brought it all together, right? So that's the playbook that you're doing, Jerry. I mean, you know this, right? The playbook that you're doing is the exact playbook that we implemented for JWB. And in a year where it was kind of crazy, right? Like it was 2020. We started this January 2020, launched the show January 2020. By December 2020, it was like the fan appreciation show where everybody was just showing up person after person, talking about how much value this added to their life, how they feel like they're a part of like a family and part of a community, how they've made all these friends within this group, and how this is why I do business with JWB. And December 2020 happened to be the biggest quarter they've ever had. Then Q1 of 2021 became the biggest quarter they've ever had. And it's just been this like growing, mushrooming thing where now, we've gotten to the point where we don't just have this like 3,500 person community on Facebook, but we're also having offline events in like Los Altos, California, in Seattle, in Denver, in Pittsburgh, and folks are showing up, and it's like 5 people that do business with JWB, 3 people that are fans of the show, and a couple people that were friends that were brought in. And those people are then hopping on with the salespeople for JWB. So it's been a way to scale Greg's time, scale his ability to create relationships by making a bunch of different ambassadors of the brand that have created this ritual of showing up and spending time together and growing together on the same mission of figuring out retirement.
It is a virtuous cycle. Right? When I look at cutting through the noise, and you start with a small community of people, so there's 13 people on today. Generally, there's been 13 to 30 people who have come to see people like Alex Sanfilippo, who I just saw jumped in. Good to see Alex. I just look and say, why would anyone not do this? I just can't get my arms wrapped around this is like the most obvious play because you're taking a digital approach to things that we know that have worked. It's the country club and why you take people to golf. It's why you take people out to dinner. It's why you go to the Chamber of Commerce events to network and get to know people and to learn new things. And oh, by the way, Oprah Winfrey is one of the wealthiest people on the face of the earth because she was the greatest talk show host ever. And she was lovable and she created insights for people. And now in today's day and age where you have digital tools, we can be our own media company. I don't have to wait to buy TV ad spend or take an ad out in the newspaper. I can go directly to people. I can leverage social media and all the tools that are out there. I just don't get why anyone wouldn't do this. It's like, this is the most obvious play that I can possibly see.
There's a couple of reasons people don't do it, right? Like, I think there's a big fear of like showing up and nobody shows up, right? Like that's real. We figured out ways to get people to show up, right? Like there's the old fashioned way of you've been building community for a year, Jerry. So now you're off to a ragingly good head start and being able to get, 10 plus people to show up to almost every show. Maybe not this one, because I'm not as good looking as Alex Sanfilippo, but
that is true. That is true.
Sells.
No argument.
But listen, man, I just, there is, in the last 10 years, tech has hit marketing in a way that makes everybody think that the thing that works is the technology, right? That it's able to measure everything for you, that your fastest feedback loop is going to come from these data points that are completely automated. And as a result, because early on that stuff worked like wildfire, right? Like Google paid, pay-per-click in 2009 was insane. And 2014 Facebook ads were nuts. And now, like TikTok organic growth is amazing. And you can show these awesome numbers. The fact of the matter is every single one of those channels has increased in the cost of client acquisition to be able to use those channels as time goes on. While building relationships with people will never, ever, ever, ever increase in cost of client acquisition if you can figure out a way to scale that effect, right? So I think that the general contract that when you're hiring a marketing strategist or a service or something like that, that people enter into is kind of like, yeah, man, we're going to do this. And you got to give it like 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, whatever, depending on what you're trying to do. And then within 6 months, you're going to start getting all these leads. And then we're going to be able to start telling what's going on, right? Like at that point, we can start course correcting and redirecting. I think that the true genius of like doing this is that the feedback cycle gets incredibly shorter, right? Like, based on exactly who is showing up to this show, whether or not you have a good pulse for what the people you want to do business with care about, because they will show up, right? The idea that Kevin Bree has come to my show a couple of times, right? Like Red T Homes is a company that is absolutely somebody I want to work with, right? So like the data point of like who I see face to face and who is showing up every single time is telling me, do I have a pulse on what the people that I care about, right? And that's happening as often as you are doing these like live event kind of things, right? Because every single time. And the difference between the subject matter and the invite and the way that you're talking about it and how long they stay, you're seeing it face to face. And it is much more valuable for me to get 2 to 3 people whom I really want their attention to give me the signal that they're taking an hour out of their day to like spend time listening to what I say. That signal is so much more valuable than, hey, I just got like 10,000 people to download a PDF that I just put out there to click on this link, right? Or whatever, right? Like you just don't have the same level of qualitative insights. And then on top of that, once that starts happening and those people are showing up and they start feeling comfortable enough to start asking you questions, and you're now being seen as somebody of value, you understand that you're somebody of value, and they start asking you questions, you start really understanding from the people that you want to do business with what it is that's not really connecting in their head, what they're thinking, the way that they're asking the question. It's just like face to face in the trenches, interacting with the folks that you most care about allows you to then take that knowledge and then scale that to whatever you're doing online. And that stuff scales much faster than going from online, all this different noise and all these different signals to, well, is it my salespeople that aren't really converting? Is it that, like this idea of sales being like, oh, the leads that marketing are giving me is shit versus, versus no, it's not that, it's that you're a bad salesperson. That's kind of like a contractor blaming their paint, the painter blaming the drywaller, or the drywaller blaming the painter on who did it, right? But if you are right here in the space where you're getting the people showing up that you really want to serve, and you're hearing from them in their own voice, and you're getting these signals of how much time they're spending with you and how much they're prioritizing what you have to say, I mean, there's nothing more powerful than that. And you can adjust that week to week to week to week. And when that starts hitting, that's when you start getting the effect like JWB, like what Chris Walker and Refine Labs has, like what you're eventually going to get to, Jerry, right? Like this idea that you can talk to 100 people once a week of the folks that you want to do business with, you're doing business with, and are curious about doing business with you, and get them talking to each other and be able to incorporate all that qualitative stuff into the way that you speak, into the way that you serve, into whatever product you're gonna do. Like there's nothing more powerful than being right there doing it. But normally when you're the leader of a company, that most people see that as going to the Chamber of Commerce. And that's like, man, what if I'm going to spend 4 hours of my day and I'm not going to meet anybody? Well, like if you can contain it to this one interaction and you can start adding on all those insights, once you start getting to those insights, it's exactly what you need to put on your website. It's exactly what your ads need to start saying, right? Like it just starts really scaling very well.
I think that's the point, Pablo, right? It's accelerating the feedback loop. You used to put stuff out into the ether, and then you'd wait for people to come into your store and you'd say, how did you hear about us? And you try and connect the dots, whether it was the local newspaper ad or the mailer that you did or whatever it might be. And you can do that in a digital world on an immediate basis. You just have to continually ask the question, like, what's important to you? What's going on? And then you see that, and then you can scale that piece of information, because if this group is interested in it, I'm sure there's a lot more people who are interested in the same exact thing. Super, super important.
Yeah. And if one person is confused about what you're saying, I guarantee you there's 100 people that are confused about what you're saying in the same way.
That's right. One thing that I'll just make a note of, we're going to be here, another maybe 10, 15 minutes. And then Pablo's we'll open up the floor and ask him any questions, and then I'll close it off. So if you have any questions about this strategy, I can speak to this personally. Like this is the 9th show that I've done. So we're just over 2 months in. It has been incredible to see people who I have never met, people who I have no idea who they are, coming in and saying, I saw your content because someone that you're connected to commented on it, and then therefore I saw it in the feed, and I have a question about this thing. And it is just extraordinary to see how this strategy works even 2 months into it, right? That if you have something that you're passionate about, that people care about, which is, how do we do this better? How do we make our companies break through the cloud of, does anyone know about us? Does anyone care about what it is that we're doing? Oh my gosh, this company is super cool. I want to be a part of what they're doing. To, I am this company. Community is the terminating factor in marketing. And I believe that with my whole heart and soul. And so, you'll get a chance to ask Pablo any questions that you have. Walk me through, Pablo, because, unless you're actually a nonprofit, most of the people that I work with are all in business to try and make money. And so I think this is an extraordinary opportunity where at scale, you can attract your tribe, because you can put your bat signal out there of like, here's who I am, here's what I believe in, and I'd like to invite you along the way for the ride. But at scale, you get to decrease your customer acquisition costs. So how much money does it cost me to acquire a customer? I need salespeople, I need marketing, I need all of these things. And you increase your customer lifetime value, which means because I'm having interactions like this, and I've shortened the know, like, and trust arc that every relationship goes through, people say, you know what? I trust Fonzie. I know that, he's going to do great work. And so therefore, I'm going to give him more of my business. You have this, I mean, again, virtuous cycle of customer acquisition cost continues to go down because your community starts to evangelize the same problem that they believe in. And your lifetime value goes up because people are buying more from you because, yeah, I'm going to buy from AJ. She's awesome. She's great service, timely, always has Johnny on the spot pricing. I'm going to give her more of my business. That to me is the virtuous cycle that this show puts forth.
Yeah, man. So I can kind of explain how it happened with JWB, right? Like the first
Sure.
thing that happened in the first like 3 to 6 months was just like all these folks that were their clients before. They're like, oh my God, I forgot how much I like these guys, right? So, people start kind of like what's happening to you early on when because at the end of the day, the idea that you can do this show thing also has to do with the fact that this show thing, right? This one like hour that Jerry gets to spend hanging out with all of us, we can then take it and publish it as a podcast, publish it as like a YouTube short, publish it as long-term YouTube, publish, 6 to 7 different like LinkedIn and Facebook little video snippets, a bunch of quote cards, because this guy's a human quote card machine, and whatever's happening. And then on top of that, when you distribute it, tag the guest that you had on, and then be organically exposed to their audience, you now start showing up everywhere, right? So like by showing up everywhere, people are just like, oh my God, I forgot about this person, right? Like maybe they're your client, maybe they're not. But if you at any point made a good first impression or made a good impression and, people remember how much they liked you and how much they're like, oh, okay, yeah, that's right. That's what AJ does. That's true. And I forgot that I have this need, right? So that starts getting people to opt back in. Beyond that, there's a certain level of churn that happens in clients that are just like, if you're not kind of reminding them of the value that you bring to their life, I can guarantee you that there's a salesperson somewhere out there that's telling them something different, right? So like you're reducing churn just by staying in front of them, by continually educating them, by being the person that breaks the bad news if there's bad news to break, right? Like, man, when COVID hit, having this show for JWB was amazing, right? Like when everybody is freaking out and they're like, oh my God, like, Jerry, you sold your home like right when COVID hit, right? Like if you would have been going to the Not Your Average Investor show, you would have been like, oh, maybe I shouldn't sell my home because months of inventory in Jacksonville is, at 3 and the equilibrium is 7. And that means that there's going to be higher than average short-term, like appreciation on homes, right? So like the impetus to like cut bait and run when something hits the fan, if you have a press conference that people can show up to every week, you can calm it down, right? The idea that if someone's hitting them up, trying to get their business as a salesperson, be like, Zach forgot about you, man. When's the last time he called you? Like I can do this better. That they can just show up and be like, no, I forgot. Zach really knows this stuff. I want to stay in business with you. That by itself decreases churn. And then the other thing that increases LTV is what we just talked about, the qualitative insights, right? Like how can you better serve your client? What are other ways that we can monetize this thing? Me, by doing what I'm doing, right? Like I started off with this like full on doing the relationship flywheel, what we call this thing, producing the show as a done for you service, to creating multiple variations of it, right? Like I now have this boot camp where I'm teaching it because I had enough people telling me that they were super interested in it that I'm just like, all right, man, like here's a way for you to do it yourself. You don't have to pay me $100,000 a year. I have other ways of doing it kind of like done with you. But in other clients that I have serviced and have moved on and decided to try to do this on their own, I realized that there's certain elements of this piece that are a really, really big pain point to them as well, such as finding guests and booking them, such as the content repurposing, right? So like the idea that I figured out other ways to get pieces of the pie to keep clients on that were like, well, I like this so much that I'm going to hire 7 people and do this full time, but I still have this pain point, allows you to continue LTV, right? Like you get these insights that help you in your product roadmap if you're a tech company, or what is the next thing that your company needs to do. There's a concept called super consumers, right? Like I just had Eddie Yoon, the author of Super Consumers, on, right? One of the 3 guys that writes Category Pirates that hopefully you all read because it's the smartest thing on the internet. And it's this idea that less than 10% of your clients will generally make up like 50 to 70% of your revenue and 100% of the insights, right? So it's like keeping them close, keeping that group together and that group talking to each other and to you is where you're going to figure out where your business needs to pivot to. And man, I'm only 41 years old, but I have seen nothing but change and disruption as long as I have been in the workforce. So if that is a sign of things to come, like I just don't know any different than this like rapid catalyst of technology changing things. And I think now more than ever, it's an absolute existential threat to have your like ear to the grindstone. No, so I'm Hispanic. That's my second language, right? Like whatever that saying is, right? Like keep your ear out on it to like understand what's coming and understand how to make the move a couple of quarters before you actually got to make the adjustment and you're playing from behind.
It's interesting. I share this all the time. My brother gave me the smartest advice that I've ever gotten. He liked to party more than he liked to go to school, so he got kicked out of college. Had a great time the year and a half he was there, but went into the Navy, and we shared a room growing up. And as he left when I was 12, I was 12. He looked at me and he said, "Learn from my mistakes. I made them for you." And ever since then, it has always put my radar up to say, I don't have to get my teeth bashed in. I just need to be highly aware of looking across the landscape of the business constantly to say, oh, yes to that, no to that, yes to that, no to that. And so if you can become incredibly aware of the people around you, the trends, and looking what's at the bleeding edge, what are people hooking on to next? You don't have to be the first adopter. In fact, I don't believe in being the first adopter. I believe in being the second. You should be in the second wave once certain things have started to prove out, because you let other people get their teeth bashed in and then you jump in and leverage from there. But I think that's the piece. Like one of the things that I think about in putting something like this together is that if you're not a community, you're a commodity. And so talk a little bit about that piece of it for you, like how you can see certain markets becoming a commodity and twisting that into community and how it helps your business.
Listen, man, I think there's a couple of ways to look at it. We can look at it as markets, or we can look at it as individuals, right? Like when I was sitting there in this construction company as director of sustainability and like feeling real cool that I had this title, but like I didn't feel very valuable inside the company. I was working like 15 hours a week, 18 hours a week max, because I had it all figured out. And I knew that no matter how much money I made and how cool my title was, that the moment that a consultant came, I was going to get cut, right? So like, as I was doing that, my response was to lean into the nonprofit stuff I was doing, because I knew that I could either spend extra time in the office trying to impress a boss that I knew did not value what I did, or I could spend time diversifying my influence and diversifying the amount of people that know how good I am at what I do and the things and my soft skills and all these different things. And that would bode better for me than this idea of just like worshiping at this one altar of this one dude decision maker, right? So like, to me, I see it as diversification in that regard, right? Like the more people that know about you and the more people that see you as valuable, the more options you're going to have forever on a personal level. Now let's extrapolate this idea of community or commodity to a market level, right? Like, when is the last time that you were sitting there washing dishes with your significant other and you said, I need a vacation, and then like an hour later you got an ad in your Facebook feed for like an all-inclusive resort to Punta Cana? That shit happens all the time. And I don't know if it's the phone listening to me or the algorithm is so good that knows that somebody at my age is probably burned out around this time of the year or whatever, but that's only going to get better or worse depending on how you look at it, right? So in this world where technology is getting better and better at understanding what you need and when you need it and offering it to you, can you not see a future where you're wearing whatever the next version of Google Glass is, and you see something and your pupil dilates just a little bit, and all of a sudden it sends you all the things that are like compare to that and whether or not you want it or not? Or you're telling a coworker, man, you know what? Jerry's kind of a dick sometimes. So like, I'm thinking about looking at another job, and boom, you get all the job listings of things that you are, capable of doing. right? Like, how are you going to reduce churn from the people that work for you, from your clients and all this stuff when this is happening, right? Like when everything is vying for your attention and everything that you want is going to get offered to you immediately. And at the end of the day, to me, it's relationships, right? It's that community piece. It's that idea that if my best friend works here and it happens to be my direct report, or, you know, like if my best friends all work in one place, it's going to be much harder to leave this job no matter what I'm doing, right? Like if all my best friends invest with JWB, then, you know, the next rental property I'm going to buy is probably not going to be in Kansas City. It's probably going to be in Jacksonville to prove that I drink the Kool-Aid and I'm still part of this cool club, right? So I don't know how else to battle the robots except for what I inherently know how to do, which is bring people together, because I know that that's never going to go out of style.
I think it's interesting. I'm going to put Kevin Bree on the spot, if you're okay with it, Kevin, because I think what's happening at Red Tea is really interesting when you look at, you know, commodities, connecting vision and values, and you guys are doing something different because, you know, it's real estate, which, yeah, there's differentiation in real estate and, you know, location of town and type of home, but real estate is real estate. What is it that you guys are doing to get yourself out of the commodity piece and into something where people can build a community around it?
We're working hard to build a community around building a greener Colorado, inviting people to, whether they're investors, other developers, home buyers, even career-minded. We're putting out there what it is we stand for, our mission and values, and just inviting through our marketing efforts people to be a part of that in whatever of those four pockets we can bring them into.
I think it's amazing. I always look at companies that, you know, or CEOs that I speak to who are disillusioned because, you know, I speak to a lot of people who are just want more out of life or want more from the work that they're doing. And I ask them, like, well, what is it that you want? Or what's the problem that you solve? Or why did you start the business? And I get this sheepish, like, I'm not sure anymore. And, you know, if you're blowing like a leaf in the wind, I promise you, you're going to be disillusioned. It's the companies that put the stake in the ground and say, here's who we are, here's what we believe in, here's the impact that we're going to go make, and here's how we're going to go do it. Here's the operating system that you can expect from us. That's the only way that you can create a compelling company. And it's the same thing. The only way you can create a community is if you're really clear to say, we're all here because we're interested in improving our work life, and how do we create and value people differently, because work doesn't have to suck. We can be in a place where we're doing inspired work with people that we love and go home every night and say, I love my job. This is amazing. I can't even believe they pay me to do this. This is incredible. And it's all the hallmarks that come back to, are you clear on the impact that you want to make? Are you clear on the values? Otherwise, you can't have community because people can't come along because they don't know what they're coming along for. And I think you're finding that, Pablo, with the types of clients that are coming in and attracted to the idea of, yes, I want to build a community because that makes sense. It identifies with who we are and how we're proud of the company that we have built. Who's coming to do this strategy? Who are the people that you're talking to?
Yeah. To me, it's so obvious that if you, and that's why, you know, that's why I called out, Kevin, I called you out because I really admire Red Tea, right? Like, I think that everything that you guys are doing is right? Like I think I've talked to Nathan, and Nathan is going really hard at winning best places to work, right? So I don't think that there is a better strategy than to have a bunch of awesome people working for you that all really, really like each other. Like that to me is number one, right? Like if that is the strategy that you're pursuing, I think that is absolutely the right move, right? Like philosophically aligned, you know, talent wise, everybody at a certain level that expects great things out of each other. That's going to bring the best out of a company. And if you're doing that, the best thing you can do is shine a spotlight on all these people, right? Like the reason why to me that's such a great growth strategy is because now everybody that interacts with your business is somebody that's going to convince whoever interacted with them that they either want to work there or they want to do business with you, right? Or that they want to recommend you to somebody, right? So like, it's that, right? It's the people that as we cycled through our product market fit, which quite frankly, I can't say that I fully have yet, but it's very, very obvious that there are companies that want to do this because they want to see themselves as Oprah. And then there's companies that want to do this because they literally believe that the more time you get to know us and spend time with us and spend time with the people that work for me, the more business you're going to do with me, right? Like it's the companies that are on a mission, that have these core values, that make it easy for the outside world to be like, yep, that's me too, I'm in, right? Like, so to me, that's the future of all of this. Number one, companies are going to figure this out. This idea that like, we no longer work in a power over world. We work in a power with world, right? Like freedom of information means that whatever your warts are going to be shown. So you better just have enough great qualities that people are like, yeah, he's got warts, but he's a great person, right? So like you gotta win the right way by making sure that the people around you are winning by winning with you, right? Aligning yourself with the folks that you want to win, be it your employees or be it your clients, right? And once you're doing that, it's a matter of just being as loud as possible about it, right? Like as like transparent as you can be and let people in. Like, I just don't think there's anything more powerful than that. So yeah, that's the type of company that we're attracting now that we realize that that's what's happening.
And like to that point, so Carol Ann, super fan, right? I know AJ, who's on this call, Caitlin, who's on this call, Alexandra, who I have not met yet, but I know her father. You look at the DNA of these people and you look at the way they work together, they are able to accomplish more because of the trust that they have in each other and the shared values they have and how they treat each other. And I just think that that's like a key hallmark of what business looks like in the future. We're in this great resignation. 4 million people have voluntarily left their jobs every month since last July. Why? Because they're seeking purpose, values alignment, and social responsibility. Period. Look at all the data, look at everything that's happening. People have looked up and said, I will not be a transaction anymore. And if companies don't understand that, both with their internal stakeholders, the people that they employ who actually do the work to create the profits within a company, and their clients in the same way, you're missing a massive opportunity. And if you aren't clear on your vision and your values, get clear on your vision and your values, because the market will pass you by. Your people will leave you because you'll give them no reason. I talk about you have to have a handle on your business. People have to know how to grab onto your business. If you don't have that, I guarantee you people are leaving you, whether it's clients or whether it's employees. And so, again, to your point, like use that to your advantage. We're in, unemployment's at 3.9%. It's worse than it was pre-COVID. Imagine if people looked and said, wow, that guy's really smart, or that woman's really smart. I identify with their approach to business. That's a company that I might be interested in working with. You change the dynamics of like seeking people out to changing its one-way traffic coming in. And the whole purpose of marketing, Dave Gerhardt talks about this in his book, Founder Brand. The whole purpose of marketing,
Dave Gerhardt, top three.
He is a top 3 guy. Yeah. He's number 2 in my mind. Is the purpose of marketing is to make sales easier. And that it doesn't matter if you're attracting clients, doesn't matter if you're attracting employees. The whole point is sales is really a conversion point. You're convincing someone to come along on the mission with you. And I just think this is a great megaphone for people to share what their view of the world is and to find people who identify with it.
Amen to that, bro.
Amen.
Can we give some like practical tips of how people can do this by themselves?
Yeah, let's do it.
What's become very, very clear to me in pulling this stuff off, right? And Jerry, you can attest to this, is the idea that if you're gonna be audacious enough to be emailing people on the regular, you got to think about what's in it for them, right? Like if you're going to be inviting people to like, hey, go come spend an hour on Zoom with me, man. That sucks. That's not the invite that everybody wants to receive. So you got to really think about.
No, it's the invite that everyone on this call wanted to receive because they're all here.
Correct. Well, listen, I assume that any extra email in my inbox is like a slightly bit of a pain in the ass, no matter what it is. It's one more email, right? It's one more thing to look through, another decision to make, right? So like really be in the mind space of like, if you're trying to gather folks, make sure that you are thinking, is this something that a Carol Ann is sitting there thinking, man, I wish I knew more about X if you want to do business with Carol Ann, right? Like if Carol Ann is thinking, I wish I knew more about X, and you believe that, then ask yourself, who knows about X that has a compelling enough story that when I email Carol Ann and, I know her, so she's going to open my email because she sees my name. She's not gonna be like, ah, shit, man, Pablo's sending me this, right? Like she's going to think, oh, interesting. Yeah, I'm thinking about showing up for this, right? Like, so that's where it's got to come from. It's got to come from a place of service. And how you kind of just map this stuff out is go back to this idea of these like pillars of what helps people decide how to achieve the thing that they, hire you to do, right? Whether it's hiring you to, and I don't know everybody else's business model, right? But like hiring you to be part of building a greener Colorado, right? Like those folks care about, what is the best, what is the best real estate type that I can be a part of, invest in, right? If you're attracting investors, they also care about, what are the other benefits around this? What are the other opportunities around the space? What are the risks in this space? What else are they probably thinking about? Where to find easy capital? Like what are other avenues for opportunities? And start thinking, what are the tools that I can use to do this stuff, right? Like when I started realizing that my stuff is working is because, like I said, right, I started thinking not just what's an interesting conversation for me to have, but like, is my ideal client thinking about super consumers and something like that? Is my ideal client thinking about content AI tools, right? Like, are they considering these things, right? Are they, when they're invited to speak to an expert? My next show is about launching an NFT as a B2B business, right? Like everybody's talking about NFTs. Nobody knows, like it feels like if you're an influencer, that makes sense, but does it make sense for businesses? I kind of want to find out about this, right? Like I'm testing every single week what's important. And then from understanding that, I create like a mind map in my head of just like, this is what's important to folks. Can I find people that have a compelling enough story to tell around this subject? And then you start inviting them, you reach out to those folks and be like, hey, I want to have this event. I want to talk to you about this so that you can promote your thing and that we can just really get to know it. But it's really going to be about like how you can do it on your own and really understand this and what the opportunity is and what the threat is. And that person is going to be pretty happy to take your call, right? Like, and if that person is also a strategic partner, that's really, really great for you because you're now building that relationship, right? So like, if you just start thinking, what are the 10 things that, I want to do business. I want to do business with like companies that are like 25 to like 75 million bucks in revenue. And I know that this is going to come, people that want to do business with me, it's either going to come from the CEO, founder, or, their head of marketing, right? So I'm just thinking like, what are they thinking about, right? Like what are they thinking about and will they want to show up? Because if not, they're not going to make time to show up, right? So once you figure that piece out, it's about crafting a compelling invite, right? The subject matter, nobody would show up to this call if they said, come meet Pablo Gonzalez. You're like, that's cool. I already had enough Mexican food. Like, that's not interesting to me. But the invite of just like the marketing strategy that I most understand, that I most recommend, that's like, oh, okay, well, if Jerry's recommending this like marketing strategy, that's really important, right? So like make the value really, really apparent in the invite. And then, story tell a little bit in the invitation itself, right? Like, Jerry is now a practitioner of this thing called the ABT. That's the and, but, therefore, where you can engage the limbic system in like storytelling. That is this, the and is like establish something that they believe and where the world that's happening right now and the world is headed, but you insert some conflict. Therefore, we're doing this, right? So like, you know, you need marketing to grow sales, and you're probably getting a bunch of ideas that you've heard before. But, you know, what you really need to understand is that if you approach it with relationships first, then all the content that you make on the back end is a bonus. And that's why I'm bringing on this one dude that's really figured this out. I want to introduce you to Pablo Gonzalez on this call. Here are the 3 things you're going to learn. Once you realize that this is what Jerry's doing, you're going to read it in every single one of his invites, right? And then those bullet points are the things that you're showing up to find out about. It's obvious. That makes you want to opt in. That's how you get people to show up. If you don't have an email list, then what you're doing is promoting that stuff on your socials, saying you're about to have this conversation, see who'll sign up, put in the link on LinkedIn. If you are setting up events for LinkedIn for this thing that you're going to do, and you set it up under a company page, everybody that signs up, you're able to download their email, right? So that starts becoming your email list. And if you're sending them to a Zoom registration, everybody that's registering under Zoom starts becoming that list that you're building that is showing interest in this thing, right? So like, I've been doing it myself for like 2 months. I now have a list of about 150 people that I get between like a 40 to 50% open rate on the emails that I send them, because they've shown up to stuff that's proven that is valuable to me. And I'm inviting them to things that I think is interesting to them, right? So as you just start building this thing, that's how it starts to happen. And that's kind of like phase 1. After that is figure out how to repurpose content on the back end in a really efficient way. There is plenty of services that do that stuff, or I can send you a YouTube video of how we do it, or, you know, or whatever, right? Because that starts building that web. And to me, it's all about like value, connections, and content, right? Like if you're showing up with value and people are like opting in because you're making it really, really valuable, then they show up to this call and you are purposefully involving them in the conversation, right? Like you not only get to show up and listen to Jerry's building a relationship with all of y'all. I'm building a relationship with all of y'all. We're also driving this like relationship between each other. Jerry and I are building a relationship, and just make sure that you are catering to those vectors of a relationship so people feel like they're part of it and they're hearing their name being said and you're speaking directly to them. You know, that is the connections piece that happens during the interaction. And then the content piece is figure out how to get this thing from a 1-hour recording to the 25 pieces of content that you can make it into and distribute it efficiently, right? So that's kind of the high level view of how you get started on it.
I think it's interesting. So I want to talk about 2 pieces. The first one is I had a friend of mine text me earlier today who I haven't spoken to probably in 2 months, but I'm friends with and connected on LinkedIn and Facebook. And he said, I have a 3.5-hour drive to Tampa. Can you send me the link to your show? He's never been here before, but he's obviously seeing what we're doing. And I was like, wow, I didn't know that he knew I was doing that. Well, it was because we took what we were doing here and magnified it into multiple places where people are at. And then the second piece of that is people say, oh, they asked me about podcasts, and I correct them. This is not a podcast. This is an internet talk show. It gets repurposed as a podcast and released as a podcast. But the magic of this, and it's the piece that I don't want people to miss, is if you do this as a live show, you have a one-to-one, one-to-few, and one-to-many relationship that develops over time. So if you show up every week like Carol Ann does, right, she's going to start developing relationships. She came to office hours earlier today and met people who have already been on these calls before. And suddenly it's like you connect these spider webs together, and it's like, boy, I'm not alone. And I don't have to just look for relationships inside of my company. I can get answers outside of my company from really smart people as you do that. And so to me, the keystone of this whole project is to do it as a live show. It's a forcing function. You can't say, oh, I'm busy, I'm going to do it tomorrow, because there's 20 people that are going to show up. There's 30 people that are going to show up. And so it's a forcing function to do all of these things. But I thought those were 2 interesting pieces that I've seen so far.
Yeah, agree, man. The forcing function and the feedback, right? Like and you know, the idea that we can now take stuff like if there is questions and people ask something, right? Like this is something I learned from Gary Vee, right? Like Gary Vee said, people know Gary Vee? Yeah. Gary Vee says like 4 things all the time, over and over, right? Like he can either show up saying those 4 things, make more content, like have patience, hustle, like whatever. He can say the same things over and over again. Or, like I started realizing that his content was mostly pre-pandemic. He'd do a 15-minute stream of thought keynote and then just go straight into Q&A, right? And what happens at that point is that he now has him giving his same advice that are basically 4 things to thousands of people that ask it in a slightly different way, right? So what's he doing? He's outsourcing the context. And if he can explain it slightly different based on the question that he's answering, he has a better chance of landing that same exact message that he says over and over again to different people. And if you can, if you're watching Gary Vee answer it to somebody that looks like you, you're more likely to understand it. If you're watching Gary Vee answer it to somebody that comes from your same line of business, you're more likely to understand it. If you're watching Gary Vee answer it from like the standpoint of like, oh, they asked a question, that was a pain point that I have, you're more likely to understand it, right? So like this outsourcing of context is really, really valuable, because at the end of the day, people don't do business with people that they understand. People do business with people that they feel understand them, right? So if you can show up in someone else's context, then it's just much more likely that they're going to be like, oh, I'm in.
Empathy, maybe the most important skill as a human being. So important. Alex, I know you had to hop off there for a minute, but you have lots of experience in this area. You've done it as a podcast and not as a live show. Has any of this given you some thought of like, maybe I should, if I launch another one, or advocate for a live show that gets repurposed as a podcast?
Yeah, so I mean, I've learned a lot from Pablo, and that's why we started doing the quarterly events. So my podcast is actually no longer traditionally pre-recorded. Instead, I have like a bit of a hybrid thing. But again, like I really learned a lot of that from Pablo, and I mean, this is the top of the top doing this, right? Like you can repurpose this to anything. I cannot repurpose a podcast recorded 3 months ago and turn it into a live thing. Like that just doesn't work. So, I mean, I like the model. Pablo was really the first person I saw doing it. I know Pablo, not trying to discredit you, like you didn't create this model. I just didn't know anyone in my space who had done it. And I'm like, wow, this is a really cool idea. And that's why we moved to quarterly live events. And that's where we get the content from for our podcast, is from those live events.
Alex, I think that's really thanks. Thanks for letting everybody. I know I didn't invent this. I just think that this is stuff that's been happening forever, man. You know what I mean? Like this is no different than being the Chamber of Commerce and having a quarterly panel and inviting people to it, or being the bank that invites you to a banquet to listen to the local economists tell you something that you already read in the papers, right? Like, and then people network, right? It's not very different. What I want to point out in what Alex said is that you don't have to limit yourself to just doing this in a weekly podcast, kind of like internet talk show form, right? Like anything where you are bringing people together to interact with them and creating content around it and then repurposing the content on the back end really, really works, right? And it works better when you make it about the person that's interacting, the people that are showing up, as opposed to whoever the star is, right? So like an example of something that we do at trade shows is that, trade show booths are kind of like a fishbowl, right? Like you're always kind of like standing there behind your little desk with your little pen, and people are coming by to grab your squishy toy or see what, if they can win an iPad, and then peace out, right? And then you're following up with all these people who you scanned, and it's like, oh, hey, here's 1 out of 100 emails that you're going to receive this week from people that you don't really, really remember, right? So what we've been doing is helping people to have a trade show booth. You set up a podcast recording studio at the trade show booth, right? You set up some lights, set up a table, you set up a camera, you set up some mics. And what happens there is anytime that you see lights, camera, and action happening, I think all of us as Americans are like, whoa, who's on TV, right? Like what's going on? So people stop and pay attention, and they're like, who are these people talking behind microphones? They must be important, right? That happens. So you get attention around your booth. Your salespeople, when they're out talking to someone, they can get in an interesting conversation, be like, oh my God, that's really interesting. Why don't you come back here and be on the thought leaders of the Proven Chaos conference, little mini podcast that we're doing? Come talk to my CEO, right? So like you get back and you have this like intimate moment where you're interviewing somebody for like 12, 15 minutes, or, the leader of your company or the most attractive person to meet gets to like spend time with somebody talking about what they're doing at this show, what they believe in, what the future of this industry is, right? Then, you know, because we have the team and all this stuff, we turn it around in 24 hours. Number one, I'm taking a picture of the person that's being interviewed. And by the time they're walking off, I'm like, oh, check out this picture. And it literally looks like they were just on the news at the trade show. So you text it to them, you get their phone number, you lead capture, and the likelihood of them posting that on social media and or sharing it via text of like, look, I'm big shit, I got to speak at this conference, is pretty high. Another thing that we do is we turn it around overnight and create like a 1.5 minute sizzle reel that's like optimized for like LinkedIn or Facebook. Now you're winning the trade show online as it's happening if you can do that functionality. But the beauty of it is you've now created multiple touch points, right? Like you have the time together, you have the buzz at the show, you're able to also not just win in person but online. You are capturing their cell phone number in a totally organic way. You get their email because you're like, hey man, when we publish this as a podcast, I just kind of want to talk to you to see what you want me to put you as your description or whatever. So now when you follow up with them in a week or 2 weeks, it's not like, oh, hey, can I send you a pamphlet of my crap? It's like, hey, let's get on a call and let's talk about how we can best promote you and your big special moment here. It's a differentiated follow-up mechanism, right? Like this idea of just intersecting content creation with relationship building is huge. Alex is trying to plan this like dinner of podcasters here locally. This is real-time news, folks. Alex sent me an email today saying he wants to have he wants to have a dinner of podcasters in Jacksonville. I'm like, that's cool, Alex. Why don't we get some cameras out there, man? Like, why don't we get into some like interesting conversations, have this dinner amongst podcasters, and then later on we can edit this stuff of us all like hanging out, whatever he says that's brilliant as he's asking me to pass the butter or what, you know, you obviously don't eat carbs, right, Alex? You haven't had a carb in years.
Come on, man.
but you know what I'm saying? Like whatever interesting thing comes out of it now becomes content that showcases that person saying something intelligent. It can be branded with your stuff and it's a value add thing for everybody involved, right? Like the person saying something smart gets to look good. Your brand gets to be the person that's like introducing them. It grows organically because the person that's tagged in that thing, their audience is going to see it. And at the end of the day, you spend time doing the number one most important thing, which is building the relationships that you want to build that make your business hum.
Amen. It's the microcosm of what we're doing here. It's the live show just forced at a trade show. And I think it's one of the smartest things that you have going on in your repertoire. But you know, you talk about Gary V recontextualizing the same play just in a different environment. That's exactly the same thing here. And I think it's again, it's the future. It's awesome. Everyone says, oh, building content. I was just at a client yesterday and I said, if the only people in your company are liking your social media posts, you're doing social media wrong. So when I look at someone's post and there's 7 people and they're all from the company and there's no one else that's liking or commenting on that post, you're probably doing social media wrong because it's not resonating to anyone other than people inside the company. And so a great opportunity to revisit that.
Unless you're doing it to build culture, right? Like there is internal facing communications that can be leveraged with content as well.
But if you're doing really cool things, my experience is people from outside the company go, I wish I was part of that company. They're doing really cool things. You know, I had one client on March 14th, Pi Day, because they're a bunch of engineers and they're super smart. They literally made it a charity event, and you could buy a $5 pie. And I would say, I want this to go to Pablo, and I could upstage, you know, $3 for chocolate to go on his cream pie. And everyone got the pie in the face, and they videoed it and they put it out on social media. It was a hit. It was brilliant. It raised tons of money for a hospital charity. And that to me is something that is super cool in creating content and how do you reach your audience. Anyway, Pablo, you have been amazing. Thank you for being so generous with your time and your insights. Couple housekeeping notes. I would tell you, we just started the Facebook private group, so best places to lead. Alex is already in there. I don't know if anyone else has made it in there yet, but please do that. Also, Alex told me when he was a guest that I should be telling people to go to iTunes and review the show and give it a 5-star review. In fact, give it a 6-star review. I don't know if you can give it a 6-star review, but give it a 6-star review if you can do it. I know my mom would figure out a way to do a 6-star review, so you can too. Pablo, any parting words for us as you look out onto the landscape of marketing and business that you want to share?
Man, I guess the parting word is just whatever we've been really indoctrinated over the last decade to think that technology is gonna solve, is gonna grow our business without the stuff that actually works. And I think it's this idea of just like refocusing on the fact that the relationship is the atomic unit of business, right? So whatever you're doing as a tactic, I would prioritize your relationships first and everything to come from that, right? So like we use this terminology of just like, we call everything we do relationship out. I don't know if I'm in love with that terminology, but you think about when people are doing marketing or whatever kind of outreach, you're always thinking like audience, and you're always like, man, what's my audience? I'm going to do this thing, and then my audience is going to show up, and we've been indoctrinated to think that something could go viral or whatever. That just doesn't end up working out usually if you're like a one-hit wonder of whatever. Whereas if the first thing that you're doing is making sure that you are building the relationship with people that you want to be building a relationship by understanding their value and being able to communicate their value to other people, that's compounding interest, and it's always going to work. So, whatever strategy you're doing, just keep that in mind when someone's like selling you TikTok ads or whatever.
Know, like, and trust. Shorten the know, like, and trust, because we do business with people that we know, like, and trust. And I think this is a great example of helping people accelerate their business forward by doing smart things, leveraging digital technology to create the oldest thing that we have, which is human relationships. We are social creatures, so lean into that. Thank you everyone for coming. We'll hopefully see you next week. Next week we have Tyler Robertson from Diesel. Super interesting guy. His revenues got stalled in the mid 20 millions in 2019. He realized he was the bottleneck in his own business. And within 3 years, they're going to nearly triple revenues, no outside investment, no bank debt, no debt at all on the company. And he's going to share with us the lessons that he learned when he became the bottleneck in his business and couldn't perform at the highest level. So he'll be super interesting next week. Until then, I hope you guys have a great weekend. Happy Easter if you celebrate Easter. And we'll see you next week.
I would also say, if you're listening to this on the podcast, go back and check out Alex's episode, man. Alex is the man.
Amen.